It was past midnight in Chicago. The studio on the north side had been running for 6 hours. Curtis Mayfield sat at the board, headphones around his neck, a notepad on his knee. Then someone knocked on the studio door. Nobody was supposed to be there. His name was Daniel. He was 22 years old. He had grown up 6 blocks from where Curtis Mayfield had grown up on the south side. He had heard through a friend of a friend that Curtis was working late, that the building was unlocked, that if you found the right hallway, you could get to the right room. He had not come for an autograph. He had come because he was out of options. Curtis Mayfield is one of the most consequential figures in the history of American popular music, and one of the least casually famous. His name does not carry the immediate recognition of Marvin Gaye or Aretha Franklin in most conversations. But the musicians who shaped the music of that era know exactly who Curtis Mayfield was. He was born on June 3, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, the same city that had produced Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, a city with a tradition of black music that ran deep into the South Side like an underground river. He grew up in the Cabrini Green housing projects. It was not a gentle upbringing. Poverty was structural and visible. The streets offered easy paths that led to hard places. What kept him was music. He sang in church. He taught himself guitar by watching older musicians and listening with unusual patience for a child. He developed a style of playing, an open E tuning, a high and fragile tone, notes placed with a delicacy that was unlike anything else being made in Chicago at the time. In the late 1950s, he met Jerry Butler. They formed the Impressions. Their first record, For Your Precious Love, came out in 1958. Jerry Butler sang lead. Curtis Mayfield played guitar. The record sounded like a man telling the truth in the only way he knew how. Butler eventually left. Curtis rebuilt the group around himself. By the early 1960s, the Impressions were one of the most consistently successful acts in soul music. And Curtis Mayfield was doing something that most pop acts, even the best ones, were not doing. He was writing about what was happening. Keep On Pushing in 1964, a civil rights anthem that did not announce itself as one, that worked its politics through melody and metaphor and the specific joy of a groove. Amen in 1964, People Get Ready in 1965, a song so complete, so precisely true, that Mavis Staples said it was the song she wanted played at her funeral. A song that Martin Luther King Jr. said moved him in a way that few pieces of music ever had. We're a Winner in 1967, banned by several radio stations for its explicit black pride, which only ensured that more people sought it out. Curtis Mayfield was writing soul music as a form of witness, not just as emotion, but as documentation. Music that recorded what was happening to black Americans in a specific and terrible historical moment, that offered not just feeling, but understanding, not just comfort, but clarity. In 1970, he left the Impressions to go solo. If There's a Hell Below, We're All Gonna Go was the first single, a slow, spiraling indictment of American society, full of specifics and categories and a kind of controlled fury that radio stations did not know how to program. It charted anyway. His debut solo album followed. Then, in 1972, the phone rang. Gordon Parks Jr. was directing a film. Superfly followed a Harlem cocaine dealer named Priest, a man trying to make one last score and escape the life he had built. It was designed as entertainment, stylish, kinetic, fast. It had already been shot. The footage was glamorous in the way that certain films about the street were glamorous. The clothes were beautiful. The cars were beautiful. The architecture of danger was presented with a kind of cinematic cool that made it look like something worth wanting. Parks needed a soundtrack. He came to Curtis Mayfield. Curtis said yes, and then he watched the footage. He watched it carefully. He read the script. He understood what the film was going to do to the audience, particularly to young men from places like Cabrini Green, young men who were already being offered the same deal Priest was trying to escape, young men who would watch this film and see themselves not in the tragedy of it, but in the glamour. Curtis Mayfield had grown up 6 blocks from where that life led. He did not see glamour. He saw a trap with good lighting. And he had not yet decided what to do about that when, on a late night in the studio, someone knocked on the door. Daniel was from the South Side. He had been in the street economy since he was 16, not by philosophical choice, but because the specific shape of his life had not left him many visible exits. He was good at what he did. He made money. He dressed well. From the outside, he looked like the kind of man the Superfly promotional materials were already beginning to celebrate. From the inside, he had watched 3 people he grew up with die. He had watched his younger brother get arrested for something Daniel himself had done 6 months earlier. He had watched his mother stop being able to look him in the eye when she passed him in the kitchen. He had heard that Curtis Mayfield was working on something about the world he was in. He had come to make one request, that Curtis tell the truth about it. They talked for nearly 2 hours. Curtis Mayfield did not take notes. He said once in a later interview that writing things down during a conversation changed its nature, made the other person feel documented rather than heard. So he listened. Daniel talked about the specific mechanics of his life, not the romance of it, the weight of it. The way you could not sleep well because sleep made you vulnerable. The way you had to maintain 2 separate versions of yourself at all times, the version for the street and the version for the people you loved, and how exhausting it was to carry both without ever being able to set either one down. The way the money that came in went out faster than it arrived, because the things you spent it on were designed to keep you visible, and visibility was survival. And survival cost everything you had, and then a little more. He talked about the boys who were watching him. 13 years old, 14, standing on corners, watching, learning his name. He said, "I am what they want to be." Curtis Mayfield sat across from him and said very little. When Daniel left that night, he walked back into the city without looking back. Curtis stayed in the empty studio for a long time. He sat at the piano. He did not play anything immediately. What he wrote in the weeks that followed was one of the most morally complex soundtracks in the history of American film. Superfly, the song, opened not with celebration, but with a warning carried inside the groove. Push-A-Man was not an endorsement of what Priest did. It was a portrait from the inside, a man naming the thing he had become without removing its cost from the naming. Freddie's dad told the story of where the glamour ended, not in wealth, not in escape, but in a specific kind of loss that no one mourned publicly, because the culture had already decided that certain lives did not merit grief. Gordon Parks Jr. had wanted a soundtrack. He got a counter-argument. The film celebrated Priest. The music mourned him. The result was a soundtrack album that outsold the film. It entered the Billboard 200. It reached number 1. It remained there long after the film left theaters. Critics wrote about the paradox. the most commercially successful music to come out of Hollywood in 1972, was arguing against the film it was attached to. Curtis Mayfield gave interviews in which he discussed writing the soundtrack from the inside, from the perspective of someone who understood what the streets actually cost, not what they appeared to offer from the outside. He never mentioned Daniel publicly. What happened to Daniel is not recorded. He was a 22-year-old man on the south side of Chicago in 1972 who had knocked on a studio door after midnight because he wanted the truth told. Whether he found his exit is not known. Whether he was still in the city when the album came out, whether he heard Freddie's Dead and recognized something of himself in it, that is also not known. What is known is that Curtis Mayfield heard him, and that hearing him changed what the music became. Curtis continued recording through the 1970s and 1980s. He collaborated with Aretha Franklin. He collaborated with Mavis Staples. He was sampled, before sampling was a formally recognized art form, by artists who built careers on the sound he had created. The guitar tone, the falsetto, the specific moral weight of a groove that refused to let its listener off the hook. On August 13, 1990, Curtis Mayfield was preparing to perform at an outdoor concert in Brooklyn, New York. A lighting rig collapsed. It fell on him. He was paralyzed from the neck down. He was 48 years old. He did not stop making music. In 1996, lying on his back in the recording studio, the only position that allowed him to breathe properly, he recorded New World Order. His voice was thinner. It could not hold the long phrases it had once made effortless. But it was still his voice, still the voice that had sat in a room with a young man from the South Side and listened until he understood what needed to be said. Curtis Mayfield died on December 26, 1999, in Roswell, Georgia. He was 57 years old. His People Get Ready has been covered by more artists than can be counted. His Superfly soundtrack appears in more films and television episodes and cultural references than he ever witnessed. Pusher Man remains a document of a specific American reality that has not resolved itself. The young man who came to the studio that night, the one who asked for nothing except honesty, did not make that music. But he is in it. Curtis Mayfield always said that the only music worth making was music that came from listening, really listening, not to what people wanted you to hear, to what they were actually telling you. Subscribe to Untold Soul Legends. Every week we find the moments behind the music that changed everything. The comment section is open. Tell us which Soul Legends story you want to hear next. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.